recorded live at the 2021 Maine Canoe Symposium, Arctic Rivers, the Thomsen on Banks Island, with presenters Bruce Weik and Karin Eberhardt.
This talk here is going to focus on the last trip we did about 3 years ago on the Thomsen River, which lies on Banks Island, just to the west of Victoria Island, where the Kuchua was. It's one of the most northern rivers that you can run, actually.
Should we look at the map?
Yep. Pretty hard to see. This is a map of northern
Stick
Canada.
my finger on it.
Northern Canada and Alaska. And we had drawn on there.
Here's Alaska. Here's the Banks Island and Victoria Island and the north. This is the northern Canada. Maybe north.
And the purplish colors there are the rivers that we've been on. There's 6 rivers, I believe, on there.
Yeah, so this Canoeing River on Victoria Island, Thomsen River on Banks, Hood River, which is kind of like in the barren grounds, just in what used to be Northwest Territories, now Nunavut, and a bunch here in the Brooks Range of Alaska, which is the northernmost part of the Rocky Mountains at the Continental Divide. And you can go south from there. We did the John and the Alatna south of there. And you can go north from there. And we did the Killick as well as the Canning. And the Canning really counts as a North Slope River because it goes all the way to the sea from... Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. Sorry about the map.
So on that first trip we did on the Kujua River, we met a couple. Some of you may have heard of them, Joel and
Beth Hollis
from Massachusetts. And what happened was we were in Cambridge Bay, and we were getting ready to take a flight in, and they happened to be there, and they wanted to do that river as well. So we shared the flight in, and they actually started out ahead of us. But we had been talking to them, and they talked about doing the Thomsen River and how they had done it. And that's the first we heard of it and thought about it over the years. And lately, the 2 guys we went with, Jim and Tip, are getting up there in age. They're in their 80s. And we decided if we weren't going to get it done now, it may not happen. So that's why we booked it 3 years ago. It's an expensive trip. Back when the Hollises did it, it was $10,000 for the flight in. And when we did it 3 years ago, it's $31,000 Canadian.
For 6 people.
Yeah.
31,000 split between 6 people. And that's from Inuvik, which is the northernmost, it's where the Dawson Highway ends. So from Inuvik, across the Northwest Passage, landing at Sachs Harbor and in Banks Island, and then continuing north of to the north of Banks Island to the drop at the Thomsen River.
Right.
Put in.
And what happens, it's a fairly short season up there, so the Park Service allows roughly 3 trips to go in, 2-week trips. And the first trip this year got canceled because the ice wasn't out. And then the second trip happened.
It was us.
No, we were the 3rd. And what happens is you don't pay the full price. What you do is you share the cost with whoever is either getting picked up or dropped off on either end of your trip. So that helps some.
Yeah.
So we landed in Inuvik.
I think there's a picture of the map.
Oh, here's a photo.
So that's the Thomsen River. It's hard to see again, but this is the northernmost part of Banks Island. And we went from Green Cabin here to almost the sea. This was the takeout. And it's interesting because here in this bay, there was a wreck of the Investigator, one of those ships from like 1875 that were looking for the Northwest Passage. And that ship had got locked up in the ice, the McClure expedition. And the ship, the Investigator, they were locked up in the ice for 3 years and finally rescued. They were lucky. They were lucky, but that was kind of in the next bay over from the Thomsen River, here, Mercy Bay. And you can't really tell, but here, this is the national park boundaries. Weik National Park, one of Canada's national parks.
Right. You have to go in and get take an orientation from the Park Service because of risk of polar bears, and they don't want to come in and have to do a rescue out there. It's a long way in. So we got to Inuvik and we had the orientation. Karen's luggage got misplaced on a flight. Came in the next day, torn open. This is a photo of her and Jim with her bag.
My late torn open bag.
We had a little bit of trouble finding fuel. We got Coleman fuel, but we had a few stoves that used the canisters, and there weren't any to be found in town. So we got another Coleman stove from the outfitter. We used alley pack boats that we rented there.
So that was the point we made earlier today, that you really need to leave extra time before you go in and on the way out for all these kind of things to go wrong.
Right. This is the plane we took in, a Twin Otter. As she said, you fly from Inuvik, we go to Sax Harbor on the island, refuel, then go up. That changed on the way out. I'll explain that when we get to the end of the trip. And this was a view from the plane window of the pack ice that we're flying over to get.
So this is now looking up the Northwest Passage.
Yep.
Can you see? Now I'm in the
Can you see now? Half of it. But you need to see too.
And this is landing at the river. With a bit of ice on the shore still. We landed on a pretty nice field, actually, called Green Cabin, which is kind of a research center. Researchers go there, stay in the cabin, and they've got a weather station there, and they've got monitoring for doing research on the permafrost and the changes in it, which has been happening. And when we got there, it was cold and windy, and we ended up spending a few days there because we just didn't want to get in the water. Finally, we did.
And using the cabin, which was open, because the wind was so strong that it's hard to even cook with that kind of wind. So it's really nice to have a shelter to cook in and at least speak to each other in.
Well, and also when you land, it takes a while to get your gear together and pack the way you want it. So we spent a lot of time doing that. And here we are. We did learn how to put the boats together before we left Inuvik. That's one of the things we had to do again when we got there.
If any of you have ever put those alley pack boats together, the big risk is skinning your knuckles. They're really tough on your hands.
Yeah. And then here we are getting our gear together at the river. And then we're off. The river is fairly flat. I wouldn't say white water. It's quick water. A fairly safe river to go down. We've got some, we got some river views, but they may be hard for you to see.
Well, that shot just then was our first glimpse of the muskox. Some of you might be able to see there were some lumps along the shore. And of course, the Thomsen River is famous for the muskoxen. It's kind of one of the places that has the highest concentration of muskoxen in the Arctic. And we had some pretty close encounters. Of course, you don't want to get too close because they can be dangerous, but we'd see them on the riverbank and sometimes in the distance, sometimes close up. And the muskoxen are one reason that river actually was quite well traveled by Inuit throughout time. They'd been there for thousands of years traveling that river, which is why the national park Olavik means, or the Inuit name for the Thomsen is something like the place that people travel through, because that's been a transit river for quite some time, and we'll see pictures at the end of some of the cultural artifacts that have been left.
Wildflowers. Everything was in bloom, full summer.
Wow.
24 hours of daylight. All covered up. We don't use insect repellents when we go because it just seems to be hopeless. So we cover up head nets, long sleeve shirts, gloves, long pants, and tough it out.
And stay in the middle of the river, and you might get less in the river.
Little breeze. Yep.
Yeah.
We had 6 people on our trip. We had Jim and Tip, the guys we've always gone with on trips, ourselves, and then we had a friend from Australia, Karen's, and we had a guy named Jason from California. And Jason got to know these guys. He's a filmmaker, and he did a film about Jim and Tip on the Muir Trail as they hiked it many years ago. And he got to know them, and then they told him about all these trips they've been doing, because they met on the Yukon back when they were in their 20s, and they've been doing these trips ever since. So they've got over 50 years of traveling on these canoe trips in the Arctic. And so he wanted to do a film about that, which he did, and it went to the Banff Mountain Film Festival, and we had a link to it. We were going to show it if we were indoors or...
Well, last year we were going to be in the evening and...
Right, more time, but we do have a link to it for you so you can watch it on the internet.
It's about them going back to the Noatak after about 30 years. It's called Arctic Return to the Noatak. So Jason is the filmmaker, and he was on this trip with us on the Thomsen.
He had a lot of experience backpacking, but not very much canoeing.
But he had a great attitude.
And a lot of camera equipment.
This is not very clear, but it just was intended to show that the river was swift and unobstructed, but then, as often happens when it shallows out, there's a lot of cobbles and shallows, and you kind of want to avoid those because you could get hung up in them, as you may have experience with that.
The terrain was kind of rolling hills, nothing high. If you went out for a hike, though, you really had to watch where you were going because you need to be able to find your way back, and everything kind of looks the same out there. There's no landmarks. And I know we went out on a few hikes. You'd have to pick out something you could recognize, and then go to the next spot and be able to recognize that. But we don't. You take compasses with us because that's far north. They don't work. And we didn't really use the GPS, I guess, either.
Wow.
Well, you just go down the river. That's
Right.
easy.
Right. And you try not to hike out of sight of the river. So, there's our one campsite with all the muskox skulls piled up around.
People this morning were asking about tents, and you can't see it so clearly, but this is one of the tents that's like a tunnel tent almost that worked pretty well for the guys.
Yeah.
And the one that lost where the fly failed is this yellow one here. I think that might be a Mountain Hardware, but I'm not sure. Oh no, that's some other logo. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, we had very high winds at times and snow, and it really tested out the tents. We had to spend a couple days in the tents and just. You couldn't even sleep. The flapping of the fly and everything was just almost
I
too much.
think, we've done a number of these trips, but I think we've never spent as much time in the tents as we did on that trip. And also, just because the wind being so cold and so fierce, you don't spend a lot of time sitting around socializing either, which was a disappointment because that's such a great group and they're so good to socialize with. But we got to spend time together.
Right. And and usually on these trips, we do a lot of hiking. a lot of layover days to go on hikes, and some days you just get up and you're sitting there thinking you're going to go paddling that day, and you end up sitting around talking and drinking tea for the whole day instead. Another campsite view, ice. It was pretty interesting, some erosion on the banks. You could see the permafrost, the ice underneath, still not very far down. I know when I went out to dig for the latrine, it was only about this far down and it was ice. Jason with his gear.
Breakfast, actually he's cooking, I think.
Cooking, yeah.
And this is like a midnight sun kind of shot. Sometimes we use the boats for a windbreak. Often we use the boats for a windbreak.
Right.
Especially for cooking.
This was the tents under the windstorm, the worst of it.
Yeah, at a place called Baker Creek, really windy.
Yeah.
Did you worry about your tents or boats blowing away?
No, maybe the tents more than the boats. We usually try to get the boats down into a low spot and tie things, whatever we can.
Definitely tie the boats off no matter what. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not much to tie to because there's no trees or anything. But yeah.
And the tents could stake down well enough so that it wouldn't lift up?
Yeah, and we also, a lot of it you had to pile your gear inside too and your bodies to help.
Or rocks. Sometimes there's nothing to tie off on. Use rocks to tie down. I remember and also, using extra cord and staking things out really well with rocks.
Right. And our tent was well ventilated, but it didn't handle the wind as well. We ended up putting a poncho inside, in between the fly and the tent, to try to seal it out a little bit.
Yeah, we had we kind of had a summer tent instead of a all-season tent, and so two sides of it are screens. So we ended up, I don't even remember how I did it, but I fastened a poncho as a tarp just to close off the screen. So cold. But then we wake up.
Yeah, this was we had a beautiful campsite here and good weather the whole time at this campsite. So we elected to stay a while, but I think fairly early on when we were there, I woke up one morning and went out to take a leak. And as I'm standing out there, I see a wolf coming in the camp. And so I knew Jason was probably laying there with his cameras ready. And so I said, Jason, there's a wolf in camp on the riverside of your tent. And you could hear everybody's tents unzip as they stuck their cameras out. And they all got some good photos. This one was taken by Maureen by chance. She was just snapping photos off. And there was a pile of rocks out on the corner of this area where we were. And this is of the wolf lifting his leg and marking his territory where we were.
And that's right, actually, outside Jason's tent. That yellow fly is Jason's tent, yeah.
Right.
So telling Jason, I'm moving into your tent.
Right. And so we had some really nice weather there. One day the group decided to go for a hike out to a lake. And I didn't really feel like going. And Jim wanted to spend a day in camp. And so during the middle of the day, I'm standing outside, and off in the distance I see two wolves heading towards me. And then I saw them split up. And one went more inland, and one came kind of directly toward me. And so I yelled over to Jim. I said, Jim, there's a wolf coming. So I went over, and he got out of his tent, and we both stood close to each other. And the wolf came in, and it went from tent to tent to tent, and then it came up to us. And it was about 10 or 12 feet away. And the other wolf had passed behind us. There was a little bluff there, and you couldn't see it. But I knew she was right behind us. And so the male wolf was there, and he never made eye contact. He kind of just looked around, and he kept looking over where she was, and I kept looking over there to let him know that I knew she was there and wasn't sneaking up on me. And finally, he just walked away and went over the bluff, and then you could see the two of them running off into the distance. And it was a very interesting experience. We had no idea what was going to happen, what the wolves were thinking, or what should we do. At one point, I said to Jim, do you have your bear spray? He said, oh, it's in the tent. Of course. So, I know he was very nervous. He tried taking a photo of it, and he said he only got the back end of it. He was shaking so much. But it was, I have to say, that was one of the best experiences I've ever had on a trip, having that wolf come up to us. Like that. Just amazing.
And just gently say,
yep.
This is
it's
actually my territory, but you guys are here.
Yeah. So the other group, they came back to camp, and we left the next day. But amazing. I have this photo on the refrigerator at home.
That's from when I was 12 feet away,
Yeah. Wow. Pretty amazing. That's our tent in the background.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need a time check.
Oh, time?
Yeah, time check.
We're good. We saw a few caribou there, not too many.
Yeah.
There's Perry's caribou on the island. I think they came over from Victoria, back and forth, on the ice.
Perry's is it's a smaller race of caribou, smaller size.
They just found on the islands.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there's very many left. Of course, the muskox. Remember those? Also on this island is where someone shot a bear that was a cross between a polar bear and a grizzly.
Wow.
And they think it might have come over from Victoria Island. There was one denned up over there. They did a lot of DNA analysis on these bears to try to trace where they first came from and where they've gone to.
But it seems to be increasing that they're hybridizing as the polar bears are needing to spend more time on land. And it's a question like, are they going to eat blueberries like grizzlies do, or are they going to eat seals like polar bears do?
Yeah.
Yeah. How viable is this new hybrid species going to be?
And in other wildlife sightings, this is an ermine that was at Green Camp. They were really wanted to check out your gear, probably your food.
You can't really tell. You can't see it. It's kind of on the right-hand side of that gray block of something.
Yeah.
Very fearless, just looking at you and running all around.
And there's some,
sandhill crane.
Sandhill crane.
That's what I was wondering.
Right.
Sandhill crane. Of course, Banks Island has, it's a migratory waterfowl refuge. The whole eastern side of the island is. There are a lot of geese, Canada geese, lesser snow geese. They molt there.
Right.
And you see, it's so sad.
So when you startle them, you'll see the whole flock running up the bank, and they can't fly.
Because they're molting their feathers, they're flightless, and it's a vulnerable time for them.
Right, it's a good time to be a wolf. Because you got meals.
Yeah. And this is a yellow-billed loon, of course, for the birders out there. Beautiful.
They were doing a lot of fishing in the river.
Yeah.
Maureen tried to do some fly fishing, but it was so windy she couldn't get the cast. But the loons were going at it. They would land. One place we were on shore, and they would land at the top of the rapids, and then it would come out at the bottom, and then it would fly back up, and it just kept going back, doing the circuit. Yeah.
And the call of the loons, you get it there in the Arctic. It's really nice.
Yeah. And this one's up tip. We're out hiking. We went up to Muskox Hill, which is an old site where the Inuit harvested muskox. And it is amazing. There's hundreds of skulls spread out all over the area. Old. They're all very old. Breaking down into the Tunga. There's more.
There's Maureen trying to fish. This is a place called Char Lake, of course, Arctic char. She was so excited, but we actually had been planning to go there for the whole trip. She couldn't wait till we get to Char Lake. By the time she got there, and she and I hiked out there, her feet got so cold she could basically fish for half an hour, and then we had to run back home. They were her feet were, because we had the setup of, I think, hydroskins and water shoes, and her feet just being wet and cold. At that point, she had to peel everything off and start slapping the soles of her feet. She was nearly in tears. She's Australian, of course, so she doesn't get used to the snow, but cold.
And the other fellow, Tip, a passion of his is photographing wildflowers in the Arctic. And he has hundreds and hundreds of flowers and guidebooks, and he knows them very well. So he spends a great deal of time taking photographs.
And if you watch the video, we give the link at the end about those two men and their travels. He'll talk a bit about the wildflowers. It's nice.
And
this is fully Lousport.
Yeah, fully sung. Everything's in bloom.
And here we are on Muskox Hill.
Muskox Hill.
That was a cache. You can find places where rocks are really piled up, and they'd hunt the muskox, do the butchering, and then leave meat in a cache, just piling up rocks to come back for later. And that's what this most likely is. Right. And you can't see this so well, but it's a tent ring. So there's a ring of stones that had held down like a hide or something. And of course everything's covered with lichen because there had been nitrogen and minerals from organic matter. Backbone, this is all bones, muskox bones, and wildflower that grow up around them. Can't see so well, but it's beautiful. And this is one of my favorite shots, but it's basically it's looking straight into the muskox skull, and you can see its sinuses curling up. And I just thought it was a really beautiful shape.
And this is the link to that video.
Right. So you can't see it. I'm sorry. But there's an address there. Well, maybe we'll get it to you like a mailing or something after the from the main canoe symposium. But anyway, it's on Vimeo. So it's a free 14-minute short on Vimeo. And it's called No Attack, Return to the Arctic. That's what it's called. No Attack is the river that they went back to, that they'd been to, and then Jason took them back to. Return to the Arctic. And I just highly recommend that. 14-minute short.
So,
that's it.
That's it. When we got down, after Muskox Hill, we were down at the end of the trip. We had to wait, I think, a day or two for our flight. And then we
2 or 3
we kept calling in, saying, yep, the skies are clear, 10-mile-an-hour winds, we're ready to go. And they kept saying, Sachs Harbor is fogged in. Every day, Sachs Harbor is fogged in. Finally, the pilot decided he was going to go for it. So instead of flying into Sachs Harbor and refueling and then coming up to us, we flew direct. And of course, there's not enough fuel, so he brought 2 drums of aviation fuel with him. And so when he landed, we pumped it into the tanks, and we had to deal with a little bit of smell in the plane from the tanks, but and then he flew us direct back because he didn't have to drop off or pick up anybody else on this trip.
And he was the only pilot willing to do that. None of the other pilots were willing to do it. Yeah.
So is the part he wasn't willing putting the fuel in the plane, the drums of fuel, or?
I think it was the risk, because once you go, there's not many places to land, and it was tight on fuel. When we took off, I think Karen asked him if we could do a little circle over that Misery Bay so we could see the shipwreck down under the water. He said no.
No way. Wow.
And what was the GPS reading you had?
Oh, you're right. At the end, we went on a little hike while we were waiting, and I got up on a hill, and I had my GPS, and I made it to 74 degrees north, the furthest north I've ever been.
I have a question. You were talking about doing layovers, like it sounds like how much extra food did you bring along in order to be able to just decide, like, today I think we'll just hang out?
Well, the trip is a certain length anyway,
Right.
because we know when we're getting picked up.
So you just made it by paddling extra miles another day?
We just make sure we're not doing too
We
long.
planned for layover days.
Yeah, we plan.
So when we knew it's like a 16-day trip,
Yeah.
we ended up paddling, I think only 6 days, 7 days maybe, and we planned for that. Because we knew there'd be good hiking. We knew there was going to be wind. We didn't quite understand what that meant until we got into it. So we planned to have a lot of layover days.
Yeah.
We planned the food, but whatever it is, even you still have to plan extra.
Right.
Even though you know you're 16 days,
Yeah.
like the plane was late.
Yes, three more days.
So we usually have like 3 days
Just 3
extra
days.
worth
Okay.
of
I was
food.
just curious because you said that you just decided, oh, this is a nice day. We'll have tea and hang out. And I'm like, how much food did you really have? Okay.
Oh, we had plenty.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like one time, I mean, you always have to plan more because one time, I think it was the John River.
Right.
The pilots were flying. We had a large party, like maybe 6 or 8 people, and we were being ferried in like the plane was going back and forth. Well, the weather turned, and the plane left Bruce and me in one place, and everybody else in the food was in another place.
Right.
And then we said, well, when are you coming back? And he said, well, when the weather gets better. But is that in an hour? Is that in 2 days? Is that in a month? And we didn't have anything with us. Like as the other guys were getting on the plane to be ferried down, I think we had been hiking and then we were being flown to the river. So it was coming. We'd started out as a backpacking trip and backpacked to a river, a pond, a lake, where the float plane picked us up to ferry us over to the river. But Bruce and I ended up being the last ones who didn't make it out on that ferry. And as the other guys were getting on that plane to get over to the river, they were throwing their food at us. Their leftover hiking food they were throwing at us. So we had, 1.5 freeze-dried meals for 3 days. So it was pretty fun. But
The other thing I wondered is the wolves, when they were checking out each tent, did you put your food in the tents? Oh, okay. They were
No.
just checking it out. Okay.
No, our cooking area is always.
Yeah.
they were interested in who we were and what we were doing there. They weren't, I think, so much interested in freeze-dried
they
food.
They were well fed.
Yeah, quite healthy. They were just interested in making sure that we knew who this land belongs to. I think. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, I guess we're gonna have a paddle at 1:15. If anybody's interested to join on Bryan Pond, I won't join because I've had an accident, but Bruce will be there. So fun to be here with all of you.
Definitely. Thank you.